David leaned over, his hand gripping my armrest tight. "Don't react," he whispered. "Just don't." I followed his eyes to the front of the cabin where the flight attendant, Jessica, her name tag said, was speaking to the purser, gesturing at me with this look of pure disgust. My stomach dropped. She started walking toward us, and I knew my family had done something. See, I'd been flying economy my whole life, built my business from nothing, penny by penny. This trip to my brother's wedding was supposed to be different. First class, finally. But I should have known better. I should have known my family would find a way to ruin it. They always did. 5 hours later, they'd never fly my airline again. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Let me tell you about my family, because you need to understand the full picture of dysfunction we're working with here. I was always the difficult child, which in my family's language means I had the audacity to pay my own way through college by working retail, to ask questions when things didn't make sense, and to occasionally expect to be treated like an actual human being instead of a convenient ATM. Marcus, on the other hand, was the golden child from birth. Private school tuition? Paid. College expenses? Covered. Post-graduation apartment in the city. Mom and Dad co-signed and helped with rent for 2 years, while he found himself in finance, which really meant Dad called in a favor and got him a job at his buddy's investment firm. Marcus didn't find anything. It was handed to him on a silver platter, garnished with their approval and unconditional support. My parents aren't actually wealthy, but they're what I call old money adjacent, meaning they grew up around money, they act like they have money, and they're deeply obsessed with appearing like they have money, even though Dad's middle management job and Mom's part-time work at a gallery barely covers their lifestyle. They live in this constant state of performance, always worried about what the country club crowd thinks, always dropping names of people they barely know. And the second my business started actually making money, they discovered a new hobby: borrowing from me. It started small. 1,000 here for an emergency car repair. 2,000 there for property taxes they forgot about. Every single time they promised to pay me back. They'd get weepy about it, say how grateful they were to have such a responsible daughter, how they didn't know what they'd do without me. I was stupid enough to believe them at first. The money never came back, obviously. And when I finally started saying no, I became selfish and obsessed with money and not a team player, which is hilarious coming from people who treated me like a personal bank for 3 years. Marcus married Vanessa 2 years ago in an engagement that my mother literally cried tears of joy over. Vanessa comes from actual money, the kind with a pedigree and a last name people recognize. She's blonde, she's polished, she says things like summer as a verb, and my parents worship the ground she walks on. My mother has literally referred to her as the daughter I always wanted, while I was standing right there. As for my business success, they call it Emma's Little Company, like I'm running a lemonade stand. I've tried to explain what I actually do, but my father just nods patronizingly and changes the subject. So here's what my little company actually is, and why the next part of this story is going to be so spectacularly satisfying. I started a logistics consulting firm 8 years ago, right out of grad school. Nothing fancy, just me and a laptop and an absolutely unhinged amount of cold emails to companies that were hemorrhaging money on inefficient supply chains. I was good at it, really good. I could look at a distribution network and see exactly where the problems were, where money was leaking out, how to fix it. The firm grew. I hired people. We took on bigger clients. Within 5 years, I was running a multi-million-dollar operation, but to my family, I was still just doing consulting, which they seemed to think meant I made PowerPoint presentations for middle managers. Then 3 years ago, I did something either brilliant or completely insane, depending on who you ask. A regional airline, Sierra Summit, was going under. Bad management, worse routes, bleeding cash. Everyone in the industry knew it was over. But I saw something else. I saw an undervalued asset with good bones and fixable problems, so I made an acquisition offer that was aggressive enough to make my board nervous, and my lawyer actually asked me if I was having a mental health crisis. My family's reaction? They laughed. My father literally laughed in my face and said I was playing pretend CEO and that I was going to lose everything trying to be something I wasn't. My mother told me I should focus on finding a husband instead of chasing pipe dreams. Marcus sent me a text that just said, LOL, good luck with that. Only David believed in me. He sat with me through every late night, every panicked moment when I thought I'd made a catastrophic mistake, every board meeting where I had to defend my decisions to people who thought I was too young, too inexperienced, too female to pull this off. He never once doubted me. I turned that airline around in 18 months, cut the bloat, renegotiated contracts, redesigned routes based on actual data instead of legacy decisions, invested in the customer experience. We went from nearly bankrupt to profitable. Then we expanded. New routes, better planes, premium service options. As of last quarter, Sierra Summit Airlines is worth 8 figures and growing. I own controlling interest. I am the CEO, not pretend, but actual. And I never told my family. I let them keep thinking I just do consulting, that I'm still their disappointing daughter with her cute little business, because telling them the truth would have just meant more requests for money, more boundary violations, more reasons for them to think they were entitled to what I'd built. But they were about to find out anyway. The wedding invitation arrived in a cream-colored envelope that probably cost more than my first car, with Marcus and Vanessa's names embossed in gold script that screamed, "We have taste, and you don't." Inside, tucked behind the formal invitation with its 17 inserts about dress codes and hotel blocks and gift registries at stores I'd need a small loan to shop at, was a handwritten note from my mother on her monogrammed stationery. "Emma," it read, "please dress appropriately. Vanessa's family is very refined and we want to make a good impression. Also, the ceremony is adults only, so plan accordingly." I don't have kids, so that last part was just a general passive-aggressive swipe at anyone my mother deemed insufficiently classy. The venue was Ashford Hills Country Club, the kind of place that has a waiting list and 3 different forks for salad, and there was absolutely no way my parents could afford to have a wedding there. Marcus's in-laws were footing the bill, which I knew meant my parents would spend the entire event performing gratitude, while simultaneously taking credit for raising such a successful son. The invitation made no mention of me being in the wedding party, which I noticed immediately because Vanessa had 7 bridesmaids listed in the program insert. 7. I texted my mother to ask if there was a separate card I'd missed, and she called me back with this carefully constructed explanation about how Marcus wanted to keep things intimate with just his closest friends in the wedding party. Intimate. His 7 groomsmen were his frat brothers, guys I'd met exactly twice, guys who still did keg stands at age 32. But sure, including his only sister would have ruined the intimate vibe. I told David I wasn't going. I was done. I'd spent 31 years trying to earn a place in this family, and I was tired of pretending it was ever going to happen. But David, who has the patience of a saint and the optimism of someone who didn't grow up in my family, convinced me otherwise. "We'll go," he said, pulling me into a hug while I rage-scrolled through the wedding website that featured an engagement photo slideshow with a Coldplay soundtrack. "We'll get dressed up, we'll be gracious, we'll smile in the family photos, and then we never have to do this again. One last time, for closure." I agreed, but only because David made it sound like a mission we'd survive together. So I booked the flights, splurged on first-class seats as a small act of rebellion and self-care, and bought a dress that was absolutely appropriate, but also cost enough to make a statement. If this was going to be the last time I subjected myself to my family's dysfunction, I was going to do it on my terms. I booked the flights 3 weeks before the wedding, clicking through the reservation system on Sierra Summit's website like any other customer, even though I could have just called operations and had them comp the tickets. But I wanted to pay. I wanted these seats to be mine, fully and completely, no strings attached, no favors owed. First class, row 4, window and aisle. The confirmation email felt like a small victory, a tiny act of reclaiming something for myself. I didn't mention to anyone that I was booking on my own airline. That detail felt like a secret worth keeping. 2 days later, my mother texted me, "Heard from Marcus you're flying first class? Are you sure you can afford that? We wouldn't want you going into debt for the wedding. There's no shame in flying economy, sweetheart. Nobody judges you for being practical." I stared at that message for a full 5 minutes, my blood pressure rising with each passive-aggressive word. Nobody judges you. The implication being, of course, that she absolutely was judging me, that she'd already decided I was being financially responsible, that I was once again the problem child making bad decisions. I didn't respond. I just silenced the conversation and went back to work. David noticed I'd been tense for weeks, leading up to the trip. I was snapping at small things, not sleeping well, stress eating takeout at my desk. He'd find me at 2 in the morning going through old family photos on my phone, torturing myself with memories of birthday parties where I smiled for the camera while Marcus got the bigger piece of cake, holidays where I helped cook while he played video games, graduations where my parents left my ceremony early to make it to his dinner reservation. "You don't have to go," David kept saying. "We can cancel. Your mental health is worth more than playing happy family for a weekend." But I couldn't cancel. Some part of me still needed to show up, to prove I was the bigger person, to not give them the satisfaction of calling me difficult and dramatic for skipping my own brother's wedding. The night before our flight, my father called, not to wish us safe travels or ask what time we were landing. He needed to borrow $5,000 for last-minute wedding expenses. "Your mother ordered extra floral, and the invoice came in higher than expected," he explained, like this was a reasonable emergency. "We'll pay you back right after the wedding. You know, we're good for it." I said no. For the first time in 3 years of these requests, I just said no. There was silence on the line, then his voice came back cold and clipped. "That's pretty selfish, Emma. This is your brother's wedding. Family helps family." I hung up. He called me selfish. We got to the airport 2 hours early because David is pathologically punctual and I was too anxious to sit at home anyway. I was grabbing coffee when I spotted them at the check-in counter. My parents and Marcus, all three of them laughing about something, looking effortlessly comfortable in their expensive casual travel clothes that somehow managed to scream, "We belong in premium cabins." They were checking in for first class. I realized, with a jolt of irony, that would have been funny if it wasn't so perfectly on brand for my life. First class on Sierra Summit Airlines. The airline I owned, paid for by Marcus's in-laws, who actually had the money my parents pretended to have. I watched from behind a pillar like a creep, and that's when I heard my mother's voice carrying across the terminal. "Thank God we don't have to sit near Emma. You know how she is. She'll probably spend the whole flight trying to talk to us about her little business or complaining about something. This way we can actually relax." Marcus laughed, and my father said something I couldn't hear. But they all chuckled like they were sharing an inside joke about what a burden I was. I felt David's hand on my shoulder before I realized he'd followed me. "You heard that?" he said quietly. It wasn't a question. I nodded, swallowing the familiar taste of humiliation. They boarded early with priority boarding, breezing past the regular queue with their status that they didn't earn, heading down the jetway like they owned the place, which was hilarious because I literally did own the place. But they didn't know that. David and I waited for the regular first-class boarding group, standing in line with the other passengers like normal people. And the whole time I felt this growing sense of dread in my stomach. When our group was called, we walked down the jetway together, our carry-ons rolling behind us, and David squeezed my hand. "You okay?" he asked, his eyes searching my face for cracks. I nodded, but I wasn't okay. Something felt wrong. That comment from my mother kept replaying in my head. "Thank God we don't have to sit near Emma." And I couldn't shake the feeling that this flight was going to be worse than I'd imagined, that somehow my family would find a way to make even this miserable, even though we were just going to sit in our separate rows and ignore each other for 3 hours. I should have trusted that instinct. I should have turned around right there. I stepped into the first-class cabin and immediately locked eyes with my mother, who was settled into row 2, already sipping a pre-departure mimosa like she flew first class every day of her life. Her face did this thing, this twist of surprise and displeasure, like she'd just bitten into a lemon she thought was an orange. My father was next to her. Marcus and Vanessa were in row 3, and all 4 of them just stared at me like I'd wandered into the wrong bathroom. My seats were in row 4, directly behind Marcus. Of course they were. The universe has a sense of humor like that. As David and I moved down the aisle, I saw my mother lean over to my father and stage whisper something, her lips barely moving but her eyes never leaving me, and my father's expression shifted from confusion to something darker, something that looked almost like anger. The flight attendant, Jessica, early 20s, blonde ponytail, that eager-to-please energy of someone new to the job, was fussing over Marcus and Vanessa, laughing at something Marcus said, making sure their champagne glasses were full, asking if they needed extra pillows. She didn't even glance at me as I passed. I stowed my bag, slid into the window seat, and David took the aisle, creating a little buffer of safety between me and whatever was about to happen, because we both felt it now, that electric charge of something going wrong. I was barely settled, hadn't even put my seatbelt on, when I saw my mother's hand shoot up and signal Jessica over with the kind of urgency you'd use if someone was having a medical emergency. Jessica hurried over, leaning down to hear whatever my mother was saying, and I couldn't make out the words, but I could see my mother's face, all concerned and sympathetic and completely fake. Jessica's eyes kept flicking back to me, and with each glance her expression shifted from polite attention to concern to something that looked almost like alarm. My mother talked for what felt like forever, gesturing subtly in my direction, and my father joined in, nodding seriously like they were reporting a crime. Jessica looked genuinely worried now, glancing between them and me like she was trying to solve a puzzle, and I felt David's hand find mine under the armrest. This wasn't going to be a normal flight. Jessica walked toward us with that apologetic smile that flight attendants use when they're about to ruin your day, and my heart started pounding before she even opened her mouth. "Ma'am," she said, directing her attention to me with painful politeness, "there might be an issue with your boarding passes. Could you come with me to verify your tickets?" My heart was absolutely hammering now. David went rigid next to me, his hand tightening around mine. Behind us, I could feel my mother's gaze, and when I glanced back, I saw it. That look of complete vindication on her face, like she'd just won something. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and showed Jessica my boarding passes on the airline app. They were valid. Obviously, they were valid. I'd booked them myself through the system I literally owned. Jessica studied them, her forehead creasing in confusion, and for a second I thought this would be over, that she'd apologize for the mix-up and leave us alone. But then she said, even more apologetically, "I'm so sorry, but another passenger raised the concern that you might be in the wrong cabin." The words hit me like cold water. Wrong cabin. Like I was some scammer who'd snuck past the gate agent, like I was trying to steal an experience I hadn't paid for. "Which passenger?" I asked, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. Jessica's professionalism kicked in, and she wouldn't say, but her eyes betrayed her, flicking involuntarily toward row 2, toward my mother, who was watching this entire interaction with barely concealed satisfaction. Of course it was her. My own mother had reported me to the flight crew like I was a security threat, like I was some random person trying to scam my way into first class instead of her own daughter who'd paid full price for a seat on an airline she didn't know I owned. The irony would have been hilarious if I wasn't currently dying of humiliation in front of a cabin full of strangers. David's voice came out low and dangerous. "Her boarding pass is valid. We're not going anywhere." Jessica looked genuinely distressed now, caught between her training and whatever poison my mother had dripped into her ear. I understand, sir, but I need to follow up on passenger concerns. It's protocol. Jessica retreated to the front of the cabin and I watched her confer with the purser, a older man with silver hair and an expression that suggested he'd seen everything and was tired of all of it. But then my mother's voice cut through the cabin, not even trying to be quiet anymore, not even pretending to whisper. I'm telling you, she must have upgraded without paying. My daughter has financial issues. We've had to help her out constantly. She's probably scamming the system somehow. My face went hot, burning hot, like someone had turned a spotlight directly on me and announced to everyone that I was a fraud, a charity case, someone who didn't belong. Other passengers were looking now, some trying to be subtle about it, others just straight up staring at me like I was about to be escorted off the plane in handcuffs. A woman in row 1 clutched her purse a little tighter. A businessman across the aisle looked at me with undisguised disdain. David's jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle jumping in his cheek, and he started to stand up, but I grabbed his arm. Not yet. Not yet. My mother continued, her voice dripping with fake concern. We've tried to help her. We really have. But she makes these impulsive decisions, and then we have to bail her out. I'm just worried she's gotten herself into trouble again. Jessica looked absolutely mortified now, her face flushed, clearly wishing she'd called in sick today. But she came back to our row anyway, because apparently my mother's lies were more convincing than my valid boarding pass, and said quietly, Ma'am, I need to verify with the gate that your upgrade was processed correctly. It's just a precaution. Upgrade. The word hung there like an accusation. The implication was crystal clear. They thought I'd upgraded without paying, that I'd somehow hacked the system, or sweet-talked a gate agent, or found some loophole to sneak my way into first class like some kind of airline criminal. Me, on my own airline, accused of theft by my own mother. David's hand found mine again, and he squeezed so hard it almost hurt. This is insane, he muttered under his breath. Emma, just tell them. But I couldn't speak. My throat was too tight, my face too hot, my entire body frozen in this moment of complete and utter humiliation, orchestrated by the woman who gave birth to me. David spoke for the first time since this nightmare started, and his voice was calm, but there was steel running through it, the kind of quiet authority that made people listen. My fiancé's ticket is valid. We're not moving. Jessica opened her mouth to respond, but David kept going. We've shown you our boarding passes. They're legitimate. We paid for these seats. We're not going anywhere. Jessica looked desperately uncomfortable, caught between doing her job and recognizing that this situation had spiraled into something ugly and wrong. I understand, sir. But protocol requires that I verify any passenger concerns about... David cut her off, his voice still calm but getting sharper. What protocol? The protocol where you harass paying customers because another passenger made a baseless accusation? The protocol where you take one person's word over actual documentation? Is that the protocol we're following here? Jessica took a step back, clearly not trained for this level of confrontation. And that's when my mother's voice rang out again, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. Oh, Emma, don't make a scene. If you can't afford first class, just say so. We're not judging you, sweetheart. There's no shame in being honest about your situation. The performative sympathy in her voice was somehow worse than if she'd just openly insulted me. It was that saccharine, pitying tone that painted her as the concerned mother, and me as the troubled daughter who needed intervention, who needed to be saved from my own poor choices. We just want to help you, she continued, and I could hear the smile in her voice, that same smile she used when she told other people about my struggles at dinner parties. But you have to stop pretending to be something you're not. It's okay to need help. Other passengers were nodding along now, buying into her narrative completely, seeing exactly what she wanted them to see, a generous, patient mother trying to manage her disaster of a daughter who tried to sneak into first class and was now throwing a tantrum about being caught. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the plane to open up and swallow me whole, but David's hand was still gripping mine, anchoring me to reality, and Jessica was backing away slowly, clearly planning to escalate this to someone with more authority, someone who could forcibly remove us from our seats. The purser arrived, and his expression told me everything I needed to know. He'd already made up his mind. "Ma'am, sir," he said with forced patience, "I'm going to have to ask you to move to economy seats until this is sorted out. We have availability in the back and—" "No," I said, my voice finally working again. "We're not moving." His expression hardened. "Ma'am, I'm trying to be reasonable here, but if you refuse to cooperate, I'll have no choice but to call for security to remove you from the aircraft." My father's voice joined the chorus now, because of course it did. "Emma, you're embarrassing yourself. We know you've been struggling financially. Just accept the economy seats gracefully and stop making this harder than it needs to be." The word gracefully came out like he was talking to a child throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. Marcus leaned over his seat, shaking his head with that familiar mix of annoyance and disgust I'd seen my whole life. "Jesus, Em, why do you always have to be so difficult? Why can't you just be normal for once?" And then Vanessa, my future sister-in-law, who I'd met maybe 4 times total, pulled out her phone and started filming, holding it up like she was documenting some kind of public meltdown for her Instagram stories, probably already composing the caption about crazy family members in her head. Jessica looked close to tears now, her hands twisting together, clearly hating every second of this but not knowing how to stop it. She'd probably started this shift thinking she'd serve some drinks and collect some trash, and instead she'd walked into a family warfare situation at 30,000 feet. Well, we hadn't taken off yet, but the altitude of this disaster was definitely rising. My mother stood up then, turning to face the rest of the cabin like she was addressing a jury, her voice ringing with absolute conviction. "She doesn't belong in first class. Look at her." And she gestured at me, at my clothes, at my face, at my entire existence, like I was evidence in a case she was building. This is exactly the kind of behavior we've been dealing with for years. The entitlement, the delusion. We've tried to help her, but she refuses to accept reality. Other passengers were nodding, actually nodding along with this character assassination happening in real time. I stood up. The cabin went absolutely silent, like someone had hit a mute button on the entire plane. I was shaking. I could feel it in my hands, in my legs. But when I opened my mouth, my voice came out steady and clear. "You're right. Let me make a call." I pulled out my phone, and David was watching me carefully, his eyes asking the question he didn't say out loud, and I gave him the smallest nod. The purser started to say something about phone usage before takeoff, but I was already dialing, my fingers moving on muscle memory to a number I'd called 100 times, a number that everyone in aviation knows by heart if they work for Sierra Summit Airlines. The line picked up after 2 rings. "Hi, this is Emma Richards," I said, and I said it loud enough for everyone to hear, clear and professional, and with the kind of authority I used in board meetings. "Passenger ID November Romeo 7723. I need to speak to the operations manager immediately. This is not a customer service issue. This is executive level." The purser's face changed. It was subtle at first, just a flicker of confusion. But then recognition started to dawn in his eyes, like someone had just turned on a light in a dark room. He knew that passenger ID format. He knew that anyone calling operations directly and using an executive passenger ID wasn't just some random person trying to scam their way into first class. My mother laughed, actually laughed, that same condescending trill she used when she thought I was being ridiculous. "Oh, Emma, stop being dramatic. Who are you calling? What, do you think you know the CEO or something?" She turned to the other passengers, inviting them to join in on the joke of her delusional daughter. "She does this. She pretends she's more important than she is. It's really quite sad." But the purser wasn't laughing. He'd gone pale. Jessica had stopped crying and was staring at me with her mouth slightly open. The operations manager came on the line. "Miss Richards, what can I help you with?" And I looked directly at my mother when I said, "I need you to patch me through to the captain. We have a situation in first class that requires immediate attention." The operations manager didn't hesitate. "One moment, Miss Richards. Patching you through to the captain now." There was a click, a brief hold tone, and then a male voice came through, professional and slightly confused. "This is Captain Morrison." I hit the speaker button and held the phone up so everyone in the cabin could hear. "Captain Morrison, this is Emma Richards." There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his confusion had deepened into concern. "Miss Richards, is everything all right? Are you on the aircraft?" "I am," I said, keeping my voice level, even though my heart was racing. "We have a situation in first class. I'm being asked to leave my seat because another passenger claims I don't belong here. I'd like you to pull the passenger manifest and confirm my booking." I could hear keyboard clicking in the background, the sound of him pulling up the system in the cockpit. The purser had gone from pale to grey. Jessica looked like she might pass out. My mother's smile was starting to falter at the edges, uncertainty creeping in, but she still didn't get it. She still thought I was bluffing, that this was some elaborate theater. Captain Morrison came back on the line. "Miss Richards, I'm looking at the manifest now. Your reservation is confirmed. First class, row 4, seats A and B, paid in full, booked under owner's override code." The cabin was dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Owner's override. Those two words hung in the air like smoke, and I watched the purser's face as the full implication hit him like a freight train. His eyes went wide, his mouth opened slightly, and he took an involuntary step backward. My mother was still smiling, but it was frozen now, confused, like she'd missed a crucial part of the conversation. "Owner's override?" she repeated, looking around at the other passengers like someone would explain the joke to her. "What does that even mean?" The purser's face went from grey to white, all the blood draining out of it like someone had opened a valve. "Owner's override?" he whispered, and I could see him doing the math in his head, connecting dots he should have connected 10 minutes ago. I turned to look directly at my mother, and I let myself feel every ounce of satisfaction that had been building since this nightmare started. I bought Sierra Summit Airlines 3 years ago. I own this aircraft. I own every seat on it, including the ones you're sitting in right now. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. No sound came out. My father had gone, completely still, his mimosa forgotten in his hand. Marcus leaned forward, his face a mask of disbelief. "That's impossible. You do consulting. You run a consulting firm." "I do," I said, my voice steady and clear, and so calm. "I consult. And 3 years ago, I consulted my way into a controlling stake in a struggling regional carrier. Then I turned it profitable, restructured the entire operation, expanded routes, upgraded the fleet, and grew it into a national airline with a valuation in the 8 figures. But you wouldn't know any of that because you never asked what I actually do. You just decided it was my little company and left it at that." The cabin was so quiet I could hear someone's phone buzzing 3 rows back. Every single passenger was staring at me now, but this time it wasn't with disgust or judgment. It was with shock, with fascination, with the dawning realization that they just witnessed someone's entire family publicly humiliate themselves. My mother finally found her voice, and it came out small and confused. "But you never said we didn't know?" "You didn't ask?" I repeated, and the simplicity of it seemed to hit her harder than anything else I could have said. "You were too busy borrowing money from me and calling me selfish when I finally said no, too busy telling me I didn't belong places, too busy being grateful you didn't have to sit near me." Marcus was shaking his head, still in denial. "This is insane. You can't just own an airline." "That's not how—" "Captain Morrison," I said into the phone, cutting Marcus off. "Can you confirm for the cabin who owns Sierra Summit Airlines?" The captain's voice came through the speaker, professional, and absolutely done with this drama. Sierra Summit Airlines is privately held. Majority ownership belongs to Emma Richards. Chaos. Absolute chaos. My father made this sound, half laugh, half choke, and tried to smooth it over like he could rewind the last 5 minutes. Well, if we'd known you owned the airline, we would have. I cut him off, my voice sharp as glass. Would have what? Treated me like a person? Not stolen money from me for 3 years straight? Not tried to humiliate me in front of an entire cabin full of strangers? He closed his mouth, and for the first time in my life, my father had nothing to say. My mother was recovering faster, switching tactics like she always did when one approach failed, her voice taking on that sweet, syrupy quality she used when she wanted something. Emma, sweetheart, this is all just a misunderstanding. We were concerned about you, that's all. You know we love you. You told the crew I was a scammer, I said, each word deliberate and precise. You said I had financial problems. You said you'd been helping me out. You convinced them I was trying to steal a seat I hadn't paid for. You tried to have me removed from my own airline. The other passengers were transfixed, their heads turning between us like they were watching a tennis match, except this wasn't a game. This was my entire dysfunctional family collapsing in real time at 30,000 feet. Well, still on the ground, but you get it. Vanessa had stopped filming. Her phone was down in her lap, and she looked like she wanted to dissolve into her seat. Marcus's face had gone red, that blotchy, angry red he got when things didn't go his way. You let us think you were struggling. You let us believe. I didn't let you believe anything, I interrupted. You decided what you wanted to believe about me, and you never bothered to ask for the truth. You borrowed money you never paid back. You excluded me from family events. You told people I was difficult and struggling and a disappointment. And today, you tried to have me thrown off a plane because you couldn't stand the idea that I might actually belong somewhere you thought was too good for me. My mother's eyes were filling with tears now, the performative kind. She used to manipulate situations back in her favor. How can you say these things? We're your family. Family doesn't do this, I said, and my voice cracked just slightly on the word. I turned away from my family and looked at Jessica and the purser, who were both standing frozen like statues in the galley area. Jessica, Mike, I used his name from his name tag. You were doing your jobs based on false information that was deliberately fed to you. I don't hold this against you. You responded to what you believed was a legitimate passenger concern. Jessica looked like she might cry from relief. Mike nodded slowly, his professionalism kicking back in, even though he still looked shell-shocked. But I want to be absolutely clear, I continued, my voice firm. The passengers in rows 2 and 3 made fraudulent claims to airline staff with the intent to harass another passenger. They knowingly lied about my financial situation, my ticket validity, and my character. That violates our terms of carriage, Section 8, Subsection C, harassment and interference with crew duties. Mike nodded again, this time more definitively, and I saw him making mental notes, probably already drafting the incident report in his head. Then I turned back to my family, and I let them see everything I'd been holding back for 31 years. You've spent years treating me like I'm less than, like I'm the problem child you have to tolerate, like I'm the one who should be grateful you acknowledge my existence at family gatherings. You borrowed thousands of dollars from me and never paid a cent back. You excluded me from my own brother's wedding party. You mocked my business and my success and my choices at every possible opportunity. My mother opened her mouth, but I kept going. And today, the second you thought you had the power to put me back in my place, the second you thought you could humiliate me and make me small again, you took it. You didn't hesitate. You weaponized the crew of this airline against me because you genuinely believed I was beneath you, that I didn't deserve to sit in first class, that I needed to be reminded of my place in this family hierarchy you've built where I'm always at the bottom. Marcus tried to stand up, but Vanessa pulled him back down. My father was staring at his hands. My mother's tears were falling now, real ones this time, but I didn't care. I was done caring. "You tried to have me thrown off a plane," I said quietly. "My plane." I sat back down in my seat, and the simple act of it felt like reclaiming territory that had always been mine. David reached for my hand and I took it, grounding myself before I spoke to Mike again. "I want a full incident report filed before this aircraft takes off. I want statements from all crew members about exactly what was said by the passengers in rows 2 and 3, including the specific claims they made about my ticket validity and my character, and I want their names flagged in our system." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest like I just announced someone had died. "You can't be serious." I looked at her directly, and my voice was perfectly calm, perfectly steady. "I'm putting you on our no-fly list. All 3 of you, permanently." Marcus exploded out of his seat, Vanessa's hand unable to hold him back this time. "You can't do that. We have to get home after the wedding. You can't just ban us from an entire airline because your feelings got hurt." "I absolutely can," I said, still calm, still seated, still in complete control. "I own the airline, and you violated our terms of carriage by making false statements to crew members with the intent to have another passenger removed. That's grounds for permanent removal from our services. You're banned, all 3 of you, effective immediately." My father finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Emma, be reasonable. We made a mistake. We didn't know." "You didn't know because you never cared enough to ask," I said. "And yes, you made a mistake. Several, actually. You can fly another airline home after the wedding. United flies this route. So does Delta. I'm sure they'll be happy to have you as customers. But you're not flying mine. Not today. Not next week. Not ever again." My mother was openly sobbing now. "You're doing this to punish us. You're being vindictive and cruel." "I'm setting a boundary," I corrected her. "Something I should have done years ago. You're not welcome on Sierra Summit flights. Consider it the one debt you can never ask me to forgive." The flight continued in the most surreal silence I had ever experienced. My family didn't say another word, not one. They sat rigid in their seats, staring straight ahead like they were hostages, and honestly, that's kind of what they were, hostages to their own consequences. But something extraordinary started happening about 20 minutes into the flight. The woman in row 1, the one who'd clutched her purse earlier, leaned over the aisle and said quietly, "Good for you. I heard everything." Then the businessman across from us extended his hand. "Tom Bradley. That took guts." One by one, other first-class passengers started quietly introducing themselves, expressing support, sharing their own stories of toxic family members and boundaries they wished they'd set sooner. A woman in her 60s, impeccably dressed, handed me her business card. "Sandra Chen. I'm a lawyer. If you need witness statements for anything, call me. I heard every word your mother said." I took the card, my hands still shaking slightly, and managed to say thank you. Jessica and Mike were professionally apologetic, bringing David and me drinks without being asked, checking in without hovering, clearly mortified by the whole situation, but handling it with grace. Jessica whispered an apology when she brought my water. "I should have verified first. I'm so sorry." I told her it was okay, that she'd been manipulated, but I could see the lesson settling into her. Always verify, always question, never assume. David held my hand the entire flight. 3 hours of his fingers laced through mine, anchoring me to this new reality where I'd finally stood up for myself. I felt lighter than I had in years, physically lighter, like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't realize was there and someone had just lifted it off my shoulders. When we landed and the seatbelt sign dinged off, I watched my family gather their things in tense silence. My mother's face was a mask of rage and humiliation, her jaw tight, her eyes red. My father wouldn't look at anyone. Marcus grabbed their bags roughly, and Vanessa followed like she wanted to disappear. They deplaned quickly, pushing past other passengers, and they didn't look back. Not once. I sat there with David, waiting until the cabin cleared, and I felt something I hadn't felt around my family in decades. Peace. 3 days later, David and I were supposed to be at Marcus's wedding. Instead, we were on my couch, eating takeout and watching trashy reality TV, and I felt absolutely zero guilt about it. I did send a gift, a small, tasteful photo frame from their registry, the cheapest thing on there at $45. Petty? Maybe. Satisfying? Absolutely. My phone exploded with messages starting the night before the wedding. My mother. How could you humiliate us like that? Do you have any idea what people are saying? Extended family members I hadn't heard from in years suddenly had opinions, all of them demanding I apologize, calling me vindictive and cruel and dramatic. My Aunt Carol, who'd ignored me at every family gathering for a decade, sent a 3-paragraph text about the importance of family forgiveness. Marcus threatened legal action, which was hilarious. His lawyer apparently laughed when Emma mentioned the incident report, the witness statements, and the cockpit recordings that are standard on all commercial flights. Turns out, my sister won't let me fly her airline after I tried to have her thrown off it. Isn't actually actionable. I blocked them all. Every single one. It felt like deleting malware from my life. A week later, I got a message from my cousin Sarah, who I hadn't spoken to in years because my mother had slowly frozen her out of family events after Sarah got divorced. I heard what happened on the plane, she wrote. Good for you. I wish I'd done something like that years ago. We got coffee the next day, and Sarah had stories. So many stories about how my parents had treated her, about Marcus's cruelty, about the toxic patterns I'd thought were just directed at me but turned out to be the family standard operating procedure. My family isn't done trying to manipulate me. I get emails from accounts I don't recognize, flying monkeys sent to tell me I'm tearing the family apart. But here's the thing, I'm done being manipulated. I'm done shrinking myself to make them comfortable. Last week, David and I booked another flight. First class, on Sierra Summit, naturally. This time, when I settled into my seat, I actually enjoyed it. I ordered the champagne. I stretched out. I felt like I belonged there. Because I did. I do. So let me ask you, did I go too far or not far enough?